Testing. Hello and welcome, my name's Ryan, I'm also known as RM2KDev. Now in this tutorial I'm going to be going over Swift again. This time we're going to be creating an actual basic application using some of the techniques that I explained in the first 6 parts, those previous beginner's introduction to Swift tutorials. So I've created this app today. It's basically just a simple list manager, a to-do list or a task list, and it's created using Swift. So we've got a list of tasks on our first tab, and we've got a second screen which is our add task screen. And I'm just going to go to our add task screen. I'm going to call this groceries, if I spell that correctly. There we go. And I'm also going to give it a description saying pick up carrots and potatoes. Then all you have to do is select add task, and you'll notice that that now appears in this list. We can select it and we can scroll through that. I'm going to create another task. I'm going to call this one here get tickets, and in the description I'm going to say call up cinema and order tickets for movie. Now what you'll notice, there's 2 actual things going on here. When you select the return button, the keyboard goes away. You can then go to your tasks and come back to add new, and it will retain that information. The other thing is when you click somewhere else, let's say for instance on the background here, the text box also goes away. And these aren't inherent functions that come with the iPhone SDK. You have to implement these yourself based on the user's click events. So I'm just going to add another task, and I'm going to add a third task. I'm just going to call this one here test task. In the description I'm going to write a test task for my viewers, and select add task. So now I've got this list with a few tasks here, and as I go throughout my day, let's say I complete these off, so I swipe on my phone and I select the delete button and the tasks will be removed from the list. So it's a very simple example just to show you guys some basic list management and how to use storyboards and things like that. So I'm just going to jump into Xcode. Now just note I'm using the Xcode 6 beta here as well. There we go, Xcode, and I'm just going to select File, New Project, and I'm just going to bring that back over to this screen. Sorry guys, I'm using a dual screen setup here, so it's just some slight issues with the recording setup. Now we're just going to create a tabbed application, so I'm just going to select tabbed application and press next. The project name is going to be called, in this one here, my task list. And the organization identifier, I'm just going to leave this at com.test. Make sure your language is set to Swift and your device is set to iPhone. Now I'm just going to add some, select a path for this to be created and select the create button, and you're going to be presented with Xcode's default home screen. I'm just going to make this full screen. There we go. So you'll notice we've got a few things here. We've got our app delegate, and this is basically, I think this is our entry point to the application. Then we have our view controllers. These will be controlling the first and second views. Now this is a tab-based application, so we do have 2 views, and you'll see those if I scroll through. Here is our tab controller. So this is the first view, and from this that loads in the first view here and the second view here. So to get started with our task manager, we're going to need to create a class, a Swift class actually, and we're going to use a structure to create our task, and we're going to have a class that is our task manager. And these are very simple objects to create, using pretty much all of the methods that I explained in the videos before. I'm just going to create a new file. It's going to be a Swift file, and I'm going to call this one here task manager. I'm just going to get rid of the comments, and we will keep the import. Oh, sorry, I've done that wrong. Sorry. I'm just going to delete that. That needs to be a, let me do that again. New file. It needs to be a Cocoa class, sorry. And I'm going to call this one here task manager. And select next. And just put that in your project file and select create, and you'll basically end up with a blank class called task manager that inherits from NS object. The first thing to note is that it imports from Cocoa, so that's fine. No such module Cocoa. Well, that's strange. Anyway, I'm going to change this import from Cocoa anyway to say UI kit. Now the first thing we need to do is inside of Swift, anything that you write that's not inside of a class or a function is considered global scope. So this is fantastic because we can actually create an instance of our task manager without having to use a singleton pattern or something like that. So I'm just going to say var task mgr, and then a semicolon. It's going to be of type task manager, and it's going to be equal to task manager with parentheses on that. So now we have an instance of task manager that can be accessed all throughout our application without needing to redeclare another instance of this. And this is going to be useful to us because we have these two scopes for our application, where we have the first view controller and the second view controller. So back inside of our task manager.swift file, I might just increase the font size here if I can. I don't normally use Xcode, so I'm not too familiar with its operations in terms of changing the size of the text and things like that. Yeah, I can't find it really quickly. That's fine, I'll just carry on like this. So we're going to need to create a structure for our task first, so let's do that. We're just going to say struct task, and then put our curly braces, and then we're going to say var name equals unnamed, and we're going to have another one called var desc, that stands for description, equals undescribed. And this is going to be the basis object that, the base object that we create our tasks from and inject into our array. Now back inside our task manager, we're going to add an array. It's going to be var tasks. It's going to be equal to task, and I'm going to turn that into an array. And it's just going to be a blank array, so I'm going to give it parentheses at the end as well. So now we have a variable set up to hold an array of tasks, and it's initialized with nothing. The final function we need to complete our task manager is just an add task function. So I'm just going to add a function, and we'll call this one add task. This one's going to take two parameters. And the first parameter is going to be name, and it's going to be of type string. The second parameter is going to be desc for description, and it's also of type string. So once you've got that ready, open your curly braces and close the curly braces. And inside of this, we're going to say tasks.append, and we're just going to say task, because that's our structure. And if we give it the brackets, you'll see Intelligent Sensing has already set this up for us. It wants a name and a description. So if we type name for the name and desc for the description, and then we can just close off those brackets, and that's it for our task manager. So basically what we've set up here is a globally defined class of task manager. So you can access that using task mgr. From there you can say task mgr.addTask and pass it in the details, and it will add those details into the array. So from here, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump back into our storyboard. So that's going to be an interface builder. So I'm just going to jump back into our main.storyboard. Now we've got these two views here. We have the first view and the second view. The first thing I do before we do any of this is I'm just going to go into this first icon in the top left here, and I'm going to turn off auto size layouts and disable size clauses, and I'm going to keep the size class data set to iPhone. And what this is going to do is this is just going to resize everything so that this is going to fit on an iPhone. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my simulator to iPhone 5S so that we're using the latest currently available device. And I think that's all we need to do to get this working on iPhone. So I'm just going to delete these things here from the first view because we don't need these anymore. So over here in the bottom right hand corner, you'll see this little cube, and this is where all of our objects are that we can place inside of our views. I'm going to create a list object, if I can find that. Sorry, a table view, not a list object. I'm going to bring that across and just drop that inside, just like that. I'm going to change the size a little bit so that it fits better with our application. Oh, what's going on here? My PC's freaking out a little bit. There we go. There we go. So I'm just going to change the size so it just fits perfectly, and it also leaves that space across the top there for the status bar of the phone. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this little icon down here that says first, and go over here into my property editor on the top right hand side. Find the, I think it's the the fourth one across, it's the property, the attributes inspector. And I'm just going to change the title of this to be tasks, as this is going to be our list of tasks in our application. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to our second view, and I'm going to do the same thing for that button that says second. I'm going to change that one to say, what will we change that one to say? We'll change that one to say add new. Add new. There we go. So now what we need to do is we're going to need to set up some properties on our table view here. That's going to be our data source and our delegate. So basically, if you right click on the table view, you'll see these two outlets, the data source and the delegate. All we need to do is drag from this little plus icon over here to our first view controller tasks. Oops, I just had a slight issue there. I'm just going to, there we go. And what that'll do is that will set up the relationship of this table to our first view controller Swift file. Now, because we're saying that the first view controller is going to be our data source and our delegate for the table view, we're going to need to implement those classes. So we're going to inherit from those classes inside of our first view controller. So if you go back to your first view controller.swift file, just over here where it says UI view controller, put a comma, and type UI table view delegate, which is going to be our delegate. This is what handles the fact that we've said that our table view is linked to this class. And we're also going to use UI table view data source. And this means that this class is going to provide the data that goes into that table view. So now by doing this, you'll see we have an error, and this error is basically telling us that we haven't implemented all of the things that the UI table view data source requires we have. Now you can find out what they are by holding down the command button and clicking on the UI table view, or whichever one of these you want. Now what you'll see is you'll see a bunch of methods below. Some of these are optional, and the ones that are not optional are at the top. Now in order to implement this in our class, we actually need to implement both of these functions here. So I'm just going to copy this line and jump back to our file, and I'm just going to paste that in and turn that into a function. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to grab the other one, which was cell for row index, and I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to paste that in there as well, and I'm also going to turn that one into a function just by doing that. I'm going to call this one here UI table view data source. There we go. Now these are the two functions we need to satisfy the requirements of having a UI table view data source. This first one here is going to tell us, this is actually going to tell our table how many rows it needs to render. So we do this by simply saying return, and this is going to use our task mgr.tasks.count. So if we have one task, it's going to say 1. If we have 3 tasks, it will say 3. The next thing we're going to do is create our cells that go inside of our table. So when we have 3 of these, this function here executes 3 times. Each time index path updates to be the correct position in the array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let cell, and it's going to be of type UI table view cell. Oh, have I spelled that wrong? There we go. And that's going to be equal to a new instance of UI table view cell. There it is. And as soon as we put the parentheses here, we're going to get a couple of options. Now I'm going to use the final option that we have here, which is this one. Oh, what's going on with Xcode? I think Xcode is having some issues there. There we go. So the first parameter is the style, and I'm going to use the subtitle style. This is going to give us a basically two text boxes that we can fill with text, one slightly larger than the other one, so it looks like a title, and the other one looks more like a subtitle. So I'm going to use UI table view cell style, and I'm going to use subtitle. And our reuse identifier, this is just the default string that gets used if nothing's provided. I'm just going to say default, like that. Ah, I see what I've done. Sorry, I've got an extra T in here. There we go. My bad, sorry about that. Okay, and the final thing we're going to do in this function is say return cell. There we go. I'm just going to get rid of the caps there. Return cell. So what happens is 3 times this function gets executed, it comes in, we build a cell, and then we return that cell. Now in the process of building the cell, we're actually able to extract the data that we want. So I'm going to say cell.text, and this is going to be our main text, the line that we use. and this is basically just going to be, we'll go back to our task manager, task mgr dot tasks, and then because it's an array we put the square brackets, and I'm just going to use index path dot row, and we're going to take the name parameter from that. The next one we're going to do is cell dot detail text label dot text equals task mgr dot tasks index path dot row, and we're going to take the description from that. So now you can start to see sort of how this is going to take shape. With that created, we should move on to creating our second view, which is going to be the add task window. So I'm just going to jump back into our storyboard over here, and I'm going to delete, actually no, I'm not going to delete, yes I am going to do, I'm going to delete these here. I'm going to drag in some new components. So the first component we need is just a label, and I'm just going to drop that in the middle at the top here. I'm going to expand that and center it, and I'm just going to enable center alignment on this. This label is just going to say add task, and I'll increase the font size slightly as well. There we go. Let's center that in the screen. Now we need two text boxes and a button. So I'm going to drag one text field in here, just like this, and I'm going to drag another text field just below that one, and finally a button. Then the button's text, I'm just going to say add task, and just expand that out to the point that it fits. There we go. In our first text box, I'm going to change the placeholder text to say task name, and in the second text box I'm going to change that to be task, actually I'm just saying description, description. There we go, description. And this is going to be the basis of our add task window. Excuse me. Now from here we need to set up a couple of outlets. Actually what we'll do is we'll set up the delegates first. So if you right click on task name, the text box, and we'll just drag our delegate to be the second view controller. So it's going to be the view controller for this, and we'll do the same thing for the description box, just like that. Now in doing that we're able to inherit some nice events for this. So if we jump into our second view controller's code, we can then begin to handle our text box. Now because we've used the second view controller as a delegate for the text boxes, we need to inherit the UI text field delegate class. And this doesn't require that we implement anything, but it's going to give us access to some extra functions. Now if we command click on that, you'll have a look through these functions here, and one of them should be text field should return. And this is if the person has pressed the return key. So I'm just going to take the function that creates that, and I'm going to paste that into our delegate here, and I'm just going to add a comment here and say UI text field delegate, and I'm going to turn that into a function by using curly braces, and that gives us this function. Now this needs to return a bool value, so I'm going to return I'm going to return true, and just before I return true, I'm going to say I'm going to tell the text box to resign its first responder. So that's just going to be text field, because that's the property that's passed in, resign first responder. Now the first responder in this instance is going to be the keyboard. So when we resign that responder, what should happen is it should go away because we have pressed the return button. So let's give our application a quick test run and see what we've got and see how it's working. Well, we had a simulator error there. I'm just going to restart the simulator and see what happens. Now what you should see is we have the list box that's been created and our add new task menu options. We can switch between these by clicking the tabs at the bottom of the screen. Now if I select the text box and begin typing something, you'll notice that when I click around, the text box doesn't go away. When I click the button, it doesn't go away. When I click another text box, it doesn't go away, and this is really annoying, but we have to handle this in code ourselves. What we did just handle then was the ability to press the return button. So if I press return, you'll see that the text box goes away. Now because both of these text boxes use the same delegate, which is the second view controller, both of these will inherit that same functionality, so we don't have to program that anymore after putting those 4 lines of code in. So now we can get rid of the text boxes by clicking the return button. The next thing we want to do is make it so that if the user clicks away from the text box or clicks on the button, that the keyboard will go away as well. So let's do that now. Now the simplest way to get rid of the text boxes when we're not using the UI text field delegate, we can actually just override the touch functions. So I'm just going to say touch begins, and I'm going to override that. Now I'm just going to say self.view.end editing, and this basically forces any current editing commands to end. So when we click away from those text boxes, what you should see is that the keyboard input should disappear. And that's exactly what happens. So now we're actually able to type some stuff and click away or tap away when you're on your phone, and the keyboard will disappear. And this handles pretty much most of our cases for when we're using a text box. The next thing we're going to add is we're going to tie in our button to actually add the item into the array so that it updates the list on the screen on the first view controller. So in order to do this, we need 2 references to those 2 text boxes that are on the actual storyboard. I'm going to do this using 2 IB outlets. I want to create a variable, and it's going to be called text task, and it's going to be of the type UI text field. And we're going to end that with an exclamation mark. What the exclamation mark does here is it says that we're declaring a variable, but we're not yet setting it, so it will be set to null until it's set to something else. If we didn't put the exclamation mark there, the compiler will basically throw us an error, or maybe it won't. Nope, doesn't look like it did throw us an error, but the I was reading in the book and it said that you should use the exclamation mark when you're basically declaring something that doesn't exist at the moment. So I'm going to use another IB outlet. I'm going to call this one var. This one's going to be called text desk for description, and it's also going to be a UI text field. And also we're going to end that with an exclamation mark. Now the next thing we're going to need is we're going to need an event. So I'm just going to call this one here iOS touch functions. And this event is going to be our button click event for the for the button. I'm just going to call this one here events. And basically to do this, I'm just going to use an action. So this is IB action, and I'm going to call this one here, it's going to be a function. I'm going to call it button add task underscore click. And if you can't tell, I'm actually a C# developer. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it the sender, and that's going to be a UI button. So the button that actually fires this event will be passed into this variable here, so that we can access it later on if we actually wanted to. But for the moment, all I'm going to do is add a print ln, stands for print line, I think. I'm just going to add some text in there that says the button was clicked. Period. Now if we jump back into our main.storyboard, we can begin to tie these events together. So I'm going to right click on the button, and I'm going to take the touch up inside event, and I'm going to drag that to our second view controller, and it's going to present us with that function that we just created, button add task underscore click. If I select that, you'll see that the event was tied to the touch up inside event of the button. So now when we click that button, that event should fire, the button will be passed across. The next thing we need to do is we need to tie this task name and the description text boxes to the outlets that we created inside of the second view controller. So if you right click on that and you go down here to the referencing outlets, we basically need to drag this plus here over to the second view controller, and we're going to assign this one here to txt task. We're going to do the same thing for description. We're going to drag the referencing outlet back to the view controller, and I'm going to set this one here to txt description. Now this somewhat differs to the way that Microsoft.NET handles this. It might be a little bit confusing, but basically because we don't actually name these text boxes with a unique name like txt name and txt description, we need to actually create those variables in code and then physically draw that line between them and say that this line of code here now links to this text box, and this line of code here now links to that text box. And what this does is this gives you a reference to those two text fields inside of your code. Okay, so now that we've established that the text boxes are now linked and the button event is now linked. Let's run our code and have a look and see if we can get this event here firing, and we'll see that in our console when we click the button. I'm just going to our add new tab, and when I click the button you'll see our console pops up and it says the button was clicked. If I click it a few more times you'll see the button was clicked a few more times. And this is really good. This is a good sign. This basically means that all of our events are tied together. The final thing that we need to actually do is add the task into our task list and then handle the removing of the tasks. So I'm going to replace this print line function. I'm going to start off by saying task mgr, which is our global scope task manager, dot add task, which is the method that we created earlier. The first parameter is going to be the name, so this is going to be text task dot text, and the second parameter is the description. This is going to be text description dot text. Once we've done that, we're basically telling our task manager that we want to create a task. This is the name, this is the description. If we jump back to our task manager class, you'll see that that appends this information in the form of a task structure into our tasks array. The next thing that we want to do is get rid of the keyboard if the keyboard is open. So I'm just going to do that same self.view.end editing code, and I want to force that to be true. Not tour, I'm going to force that to be true. There we go. The next thing we want to do is we want to clear out those text boxes, because the person has decided that they wanted to add the task, they wanted to proceed, so we're going to empty out those text boxes for them so they don't have to do that themselves. So txt task.text, and we're just going to say equals blank, and we'll do the same for description, equals blank. And the final thing I'm going to do, and this is completely optional, but once the task has been added, I want to jump the user back to the first view, which was our task list, so they can actually see that the task has been added. So I'm just going to say self.tab_bar_controller, because we're using a tab bar, .selectedIndex equals 0. And the first, obviously, the 0 index is going to be our first tab, 1 is going to be our second, 2 is going to be our third, etc. So now that this is done, we should be able to see our tasks being applied. Oh, sorry, no, the next thing we need to do is jump back into our first view controller. We have one more function to add, and that's going to be when we come back to this view, we need to update the list. And that's very easy to do. I'm just going to call this one here returning to view. And we're basically just going to overload a function here. It's view will appear is the function that we want to overwrite. So when the view is basically, when the view is about to appear, we basically need to say table tasks.reload data. Oh, sorry, we haven't actually created a reference to table tasks, so let's do that now. At the very top of the function, we just create, at the very top of the class, not the function, we need to create an outlet, so IB outlet. This is just going to be a reference to our task, our table. We'll call this one here var tbl tasks, and it's going to be a UI table view. Not a view cell, just a view. And I'm going to end that with an exclamation mark just so that it doesn't carry on if it doesn't exist. Then when we go back to our storyboard, all we need to do is right click on this table and drag our new referencing outlet back to our first view controller, and you'll see table tasks now exists. If you select that, that reference is now made, and we can access this through our class. So now that we have a reference to table tasks and the view is, we're returning to the view, we can then just say something like tbl tasks.reload data. Now because the data source has already been set up and we're basically providing the data here, when we call the reload data function, what should happen is this function will execute. It will tell the table how many results it needs to display again. It will loop this function that many times, and it will pluck out the information from the array. So let's run our application and have a look what happens. Now we jump over into our add new task. We'll call this one here buy groceries. Okay, we'll go buy groceries. Get a carrot. There we go. And I'm going to add that as a task. What you'll see is when we return to this view, we now have the carrot. Get a carrot task. And let's say we go to this one here. Buy Titanfall. Go to the store and pick up a copy of Titanfall. Add that to our tasks, and you'll see how this is basically giving us a very simple task list. Learn Swift, find RM2KDev online, and learn Swift. There we go. So now we've got a couple of tasks. We can scroll through these. The final thing that we need to do in this tutorial is going to be to remove them. Now, when you have your phone open, you would perform a right to left swipe. So that would be click down on the right side, drag to the left, and a delete button should appear. When you select the delete button, the item should be removed from the table, and the table should update itself. Now, thankfully, the table actually provides this functionality to us, and it's very easy to get to implement. So all we need to do, I'm not sure where this comes from. I think this comes from the Tableview Delegate. Yeah, it does. This is a method that comes from UI Tableview Delegate, and if we come and scroll through here, you should find a method. I think it's near the bottom somewhere. These are all the functions that a table view can perform, by the way. So if you're looking for a function and you want to see what it can do, all you need to do is hold the command button down and click on the reference. Now the one that we're looking for, it has commit editing style. Commit editing, there it is. This is the one we're looking for here. After a row has the minus or plus button invoked, based on the editing style for the cell, the data source must commit the changes. So we're going to take this function here, and we're going back to our first view controller. I'm going to add another comment. This is UI table view delegate functions, and I'm just going to add a function to that. Now what this does is this, when we overload this method, it provides us with the delete functionality on our table. So simply saying something inside here like if editing style, which is a variable provided to us, that's the commit editing style, equals UI table view cell editing styles dot delete, because we're looking to see the delete options. So if the user has swiped on the row and presented them with the delete button, and they tap the delete button, this is where we're going to handle that event for that row. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a print ln here, and inside of that I'm going to say delete this row, period. Now if we run our application and have a quick look what happens, just add a quick task, and if I swipe on that task from right to left, you'll see the delete button appears. If I select the delete button, you'll see our console appears and it says delete this row. Now the delete doesn't actually occur yet, we still need to program that, but thankfully that's very simple because we created ourselves a very nice data class to handle this sort of information for us. So back in our first view controller where we put that print line delete this row, I'm going to change that to task mgr dot tasks dot remove at index. Now the table view is basically providing us the index in the array that was at, and that's index path dot row. There we go. So what will happen now when we select one of our items and press delete, the task manager will go to the tasks, it will find at the index and remove the item that's at that index, but the item will actually still exist in our table view, so we need to update the table view. So the next thing we need to do is say tbl tasks dot reload data, and that will force the table view to basically run through the table view data source functions again, which our task manager will go and get our task count, which this time will be one shorter than it was before, and it will loop through and get the correct information back. So let's quickly run our application again. We're going to add some tasks. Groceries, pick up fruits. I think I spelt that wrong, but I don't care. Go back and add another task. This is going to be games, get Mario Kart 8. We're going to add another task. It's going to be get the new iPhone, go to the Apple store and beg for a new iPhone because it's too expensive. Yay. Add task. So we've got a couple of tasks here. I'm just going to add one more just to show you guys. See the doctor about that thing. Winky face. There we go. Right, so now we've got a couple of tasks here. They're in our list. We can scroll up and down. We can flick between our two tabs here. The final thing that we need to know if it's working is if we can swipe. So we've gone to the shop, we've got our copy of Mario Kart 8, and I'm going to delete that from our list. Now what you'll see has happened is it's removed it from the array, it's invoked the Tableviews method to reload the data, which has forced the Tableview to go back through and count up all that information that was being provided to it by the UI Tableview data source, in this case coming from our Task Manager class that we've developed in Swift. The item that we deleted is no longer there, and therefore it's removed from the list. So we've gone to the doctor, we've picked up the new iPhone, thankfully someone gave it to us, and then we've also got our groceries. And that's going to be the basis of a task management system. Now you guys can take this further, you can implement some SQLite. That's going to be a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, but this was more or less just a demonstration of how to use the new Swift language and tie that in with some of the old Objective-C libraries and storyboards, and basically how to get started on a very small application. So thank you guys for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have any questions, feel free to leave comments or find me on Twitter. Bye guys.